Again, same thing, these girls, a couple of cocktails there. So it's actually quite livable, I have to say. There's the girls doing their thing. Even Asian countries a little bit less so, obviously. They're kind of more reserved. We are currently in Moscow and we're headed to Patriarch Ponds. This is where people love to be seen. It's a very image-based environment. And people who, I guess, want to be seen in expensive, fancy restaurants, they thrive off that kind of image-based culture. So we're about 5 minutes away. We'll just walk down there now. And it's very interesting viewing, especially if you've never been to Russia or you're not familiar with the culture. I think that this kind of place can show, I guess on some level, it's the stereotypical Russia, which is probably not a very fair indication of the broader society, but nonetheless it's fascinating to see how it works here, especially if you're a Westerner. It's a very different mentality and very different, I guess different things are valued in different weightings. So we'll walk up. As I say, it's maybe 5 minutes away. So Russia, if you've never been here before, is an interesting place. Very interesting. Certainly, a little bit, how do you say? A little bit wilder, perhaps. A little bit less tamed. A little bit less controlled and directed by government, etc. Still a bit of a, I wouldn't say dog eat dog necessarily, but there is a culture here of, you need to take care of yourself a little bit. And as a result, unlike Belarus, where I would say that women kind of run the country and have more value and in general don't have a lot of interest in men, and the man really has to prove himself, blah, blah, blah. Here it's a bit different because it is a little bit more, less controlled by government. Belarus is, there's almost no street crime, almost no violence. It's safer than a Western European country by some way. Russia's kind of down the other end. It's still alright, like people, I reckon they go a little bit overboard with it. But yeah, there is a little bit of an undercurrent here that something could happen in that space, which maybe you're not used to seeing. I think definitely Russians are taught less about keeping their emotions in check. Yeah, it's more normal here to kind of let your emotion out. If you're unhappy, then you just let that be known. I think the positive of that is that you don't hang on to it, and you might yell at someone or something, or but at the end of the day, you don't actually hold a grudge afterwards, Whereas in the West, so this is obviously the start of it here. You got this place. You can see kind of image, kind of base vibe going on here. Nice outdoor kind of place. Got the usual blankets there to keep people warm. I'll just do a slight zoom in for you guys. Got a 1.5 there. And so this place is a little bit wilder. Nothing too extreme, but if you lived here long term, you'd want to, make sure you had some well-connected friends, I guess. Because I imagine that the police aren't going to do a lot to help you. You're relying on the civility of others, and look, it's fairly civil, given the scenario, given the history. It's pretty civil still, considering what it got to post-Soviet Union. It's reasonably civil, I would argue now, considering that. It's still a little bit sketchy in parts, but compared to what, right? You're trying to compare it to the safest parts of Western Europe, or whatever. But yeah, sorry, I was talking about how if someone's kind of annoyed here, they are more inclined just to kind of let it out and express that lack of interest. Sorry, my English has just deteriorated to nothing. The little impression, or the poor impression they've received from you, somebody, they're more likely to let it out with some hostile words. It's really no big deal. It doesn't really mean anything. They kind of let go of it, whatever. No one cares. Whereas in the West, we're kind of taught to be polite, what we call polite, our version of politeness. And of course, that is to say nothing to somebody essentially, and then just a smile and whatever, and then we kind of have this pent-up frustration, right? We have this pent-up frustration, and then we tell our friends how annoyed we are, or maybe we do a Google review. So for example, if a restaurant here, if they gave me some shit food, I'll complain. Maybe they just tell me to fuck off. Maybe they give me some food. Maybe we have an argument. Maybe, I don't know. Nothing too extreme. Just a few words. You know what I mean? And we kind of sort it out. Whereas, yeah, maybe in the West, maybe less likely to complain. People will still complain sometimes in the West. We're more likely to go home and write a Google review to get revenge. It's kind of this weird mentality. So you can see pros and cons of both, right? You can see pros and cons of both situations. Obviously in the West we're kind of de-escalating, preventing any maybe physical altercations or limiting them, whereas here maybe not quite as limited in that way. But despite all this, look, it runs pretty well. From my experience here, it runs pretty well. It's got to be a little bit careful, and otherwise it's quite a nice place. And of course I haven't tried to seek out medical assistance, or haven't had any problems with police or anything like this. I don't know what I'd do if I needed some medical assistance, to be honest. I really don't know. Actually, probably here in Moscow it's fine, to be fair. But yeah, maybe in a smaller city, who knows? Especially if you can't speak the language. Because I noticed that fluency rate here is not super low, I would say. And people who can speak it can often speak it well, English, but most people don't, and most people don't really care to speak English. They'll be speaking Russian. Alright, so we're really in the heart of Patriarch Ponds here. Get a lot of interesting t-shirts. If you didn't read that, it says, "Don't talk to me, I'll have a panic attack." It's some of the most random shit that people write on their shirts here. A lot of characters. This is very French, kind of looking out here at the crowd going past. Let's try and squeeze through. There's a lot of these. Even on this side here, I'll just stop and show you. Kind of sitting on the outside there, sipping a cocktail or a coffee. Again, same thing, these girls, a couple of cocktails there, mixed in with some, I think it was Greshka, which is buckwheat in English. Bit of a hipster food at the moment, Greshka. It's so interesting how it's just like this kind of, Russian, Belarusian thing, and all of a sudden it's kind of hipster food. It's got a good micronutrient profile. So we'll keep walking up. Look at that, beautiful. Sun setting on the side of the buildings here, absolutely beautiful. So as I say, this is a pretty posh kind of area. You can see the dudes got their bikes there. Although my friend tells me that really wealthy Muscovians don't tend to live in Moscow. Which would make sense because per square metre it's not exactly cheap here. And the quality of life wouldn't be super high, although Moscow's pretty livable. Like, you never really get crunched here. You know what I mean? Like in New York you can get crunched just by the sheer volume of people. Here you don't. Here the subway system is absolutely miraculous, I have to say. Often during peak it's every minute. Don't know how many lines there are, maybe 20, 25. Very well organised system. Got that commie kind of legacy. Got a very well organised metro system. So as I say, very image-based. Part of town is Patriarch Ponds. Dudes here chilling out, some shisha. Interesting, as much as I have a soft spot for Russians, I think they've got a lot of soul, and I think if you have a good Russian friend, they'll be very good friends, even though they can be standoffish and a bit weird sometimes at the start, especially the older ones from the Soviet era. They've had a tough life, right? But they're not warm off the bat. Like, for example, if I was in any other country right now, I would have been photobombed 12 times. And people, it doesn't matter where you are. I mean, obviously I'm based in Belarus, but In Vilnius I had this, Helsinki I had this, in Melbourne, my hometown, even doing some filming. Again, just photobombed, dudes just coming up, what's going on? Yeah, people don't care so much. People would rather not get involved with other people, and look, this is a bit of a cultural thing. I guess there's an element of risk involved. And also during the Soviet era, I mean, you don't know who's a member, you don't know who's going to adopt you in, you don't know the politics. Like, people just learn to keep to themselves, and as I say, there's probably more downside than upside of engaging with people, so people just don't kind of engage that much with each other. Now, I have noticed in a more controlled setting that they will be friendly with each other, actually. So one example was just on the bus coming here. The bus from, I don't know how your Russian is, but that guy just said, there's a tourist. And that would be me. I'll cross over to the ponds here. This is the actual pond itself. Say Patriarch Ponds, let's get across here. This poor guy here trying to get over. Could you imagine being stuck there trying to get over? And there's just people walking constantly, driving bananas. I'm on the wrong side here, let me just swap over to this side. Yeah, you don't get people kind of photobombing you here. It's kind of interesting. As I say, everywhere else I've been, even Asian countries a little bit less so, obviously. They're kind of more reserved and like this, and they see it as respectful. So we'll walk around this pond here. Let me just show you. Got a nice place, people hang out, come down here with friends there, the boys here having some morozonoe. And you can just see people hanging out with their friends, just texting, waiting for his girlfriend to come. It's quite a relaxed kind of vibe. So we'll do a bit of a walk around here. As I say, it's pretty well put together, Moscow. I don't know how much of it is like a bit of a 15-minute city thing from the Soviet era, but nowhere's too crowded. Like, this is about as crowded as it gets. And it's not like, as I say, New York, where you can just positively get crunched. I mean, sometimes, in the busier seasons, like if you're in a touristy area, I mean, the crowd just spills over onto the road. Like, there's just no capacity for it. Whereas here, it's so decentralized that everywhere's kind of a little bit busy without being crazy busy, you know what I mean? So it's actually quite livable, I have to say. There's the girls doing their thing. I don't know what she said, but the last word was krasiva, which was beautiful. I'm not sure if saying I was beautiful or whether they're beautiful, but this is the problem when you don't have a context. They start talking. You can understand a bit, but not enough. I really just love the filming the girls when they're filming themselves. I just find this funny. I don't know why. Because I'm Australian. We have this kind of egalitarian, don't be vain kind of culture. So when I see this kind of behaviour, I look down on it a little bit. But I recognise that I might as well be a boomer, really. Let's be honest. My attitude with these things, but nonetheless, a little bit of a cultural thing there that we kind of think it's a bit weird, showing this excessive vanity. Oh man, this dude's got his shoelaces. What's he going to do? Is he just going to let it go? Bro, it's going to get filthy. I think he doesn't know. Yeah, so when I'll actually try and remember to go back and listen what that girl said. Because the good about the Russians, they're not really shy, although they won't engage each other much. They're not shy. It's kind of nice in a way, but if they do feel like it's a more controlled space with more controlled people, they'll be more social. Like just the bus from Helsinki to St. Petersburg, I'm like, oh cool, this is the first time in a kind of Russian dense area. Let's see how they behave, right? Because I know that Belarus, as I say, it might be the softest country on earth. Might be the most polite, the most civil in a lot of ways. Again, it depends where you are in Belarus. The culture does change by region. But it's an incredibly safe place, and I just know here in Russia, things get a bit loose sometimes. Is the general reputation and what friends have told me. Oh, maybe we can go down there, walk around the pond itself. Oh yeah, you kind of can. Alright, let's finish the lap first. See how my legs feel. What were we talking about? Oh yes, yeah, they don't really kind of like do the photobomb thing as much, but as you see then, when I kind of filmed them, they just started staring at me, and then I just said hello, and then they said something красивее, which could have been anything. So pretty much everyone's just chilling at the moment. These girls with their vapes intently on their phones. A couple of couples, a few first date vibes. A couple of old ladies hanging out. That might be a mother-daughter. Yeah, I reckon it could be. A couple of young fellas. A few families. So you got everyone here. It's quite a mix, which is nice. Nice to have that mix of demographics kicking around. So it's certainly quite a famous spot here. And as I say, quite a cool place, if you will, to eat and hang. Alright, we'll go around back to kind of where we started there. Battery's running a little bit low. I see we're 16 minutes in, so we've got a good walk in, but we'll do a bit more. Well, this is something. Is this girl getting married or something? What's going on here, you reckon? Just photos. Look at the professional camera there, and makes me think something's going on. Some kind of graduation. Oh no, she's doing professional photos. This lady here is photographing this lady, whereas these two are the friends. Maybe some graduation or something. I've got a formal gown there. It's funny when you see the Asian genetics in Russia, because I see Asian genetics, I'm Australian, right? So I see Asian genetics and I feel very comfortable and familiar with them. There's a lot in Australia, and as I say, I was a preparatel in Australia, and many of my studenti is Kitaisky. So I'm very comfortable and familiar with them. But I'm used to them speaking Chinese and maybe a bit of English, but you start speaking to people who look like they should be speaking Chinese and they start speaking Russian back to you. It's quite funny. From my perspective anyway. I'm sucking on those vapes, man. These vapes are just taking over. I wonder what those girls are doing there. Let's go check out what's on this other side. There's a bit of glare there. I can see that glare off the top of the building, so that's better. Oh, it's just another little area here where people are eating. Oh man, I tell you what. You know, like sometimes just say, I remember I went to a Motley Crue show in, what do you call it? Where they play NBA in New York. Really famous venue. Oh, I can't think of the freaking name. Alzheimer's kicking in. Anyway, I was there, and just the smell, the passive smell of marijuana was just mind-blowing. Really, like I went home half stoned, just because you smell it everywhere. But here it's this smell of vape. Such a rich smell of berry-flavored vape. All right, so we're back to the starting point here, where we entered this little area. So we'll go back out and walk roughly the way we came. Still got some battery left, so I might as well use it. Still catching up on some reading while selling some morozinoli. Alright, so we'll go over. I mean, if you were driving this area, you sure as hell wouldn't drive down here where you know you're going to be stuck at a crossing for freaking 3 months. Just forgive my back cam there, I'm just negotiating and trying not to run into people too much. Oh, there you go. Just trying to get up above a little bit. So yeah, this is the first street cam I've done in Moscow, and surprised the lack of engagement. These little things do give you quite a clue to a culture. But definitely, when I was in St. Petersburg, I actually have a friend there who lived in Belarus, and I was hanging out with her ever so briefly, and she told me when there was people were like on this balcony really drunk in St. Petersburg, and I'm like, can I just yell out to these people like what's culturally appropriate? And she absolutely lost her shit. She's like, no way, don't speak to them, we never speak to people, blah blah. She really got a high level of anxiety over the idea of me engaging with this. They were just like university age men and women on a balcony smashing vodka shots and listening to music and just dancing on their balcony, right? Just normalna. And I just wanted to give them some acknowledgement. They were on maybe level 3. I wanted to give them some acknowledgement. You guys probably know this, Yandex. That's kind of the Google equivalent here, but obviously have a taxi as well. Kind of Google equivalent in that they have the maps and email and kind of everything. Yandex is a bit of a one-stop show. All right, let's trail these guys. Getting a little bit complicated in terms of not running into people. It's a bit of a problem when you're trying to concentrate on where to point the camera. Let's look at some people eating for a bit. Alright, I might go for maybe 2 more blocks. That's the problem, you don't know how people are going to take the camera being put on them. I've had a few dirty looks and sly comments, but then a few nicer sly comments as well. Fair enough, I am filming, and if it's a more of a private kind of a culture, maybe go 1 more block, I think. I'll go 1 more. We can turn left here. I think best we go straight. Oh, isn't it? So I do recall we walked past those bikes earlier. The owners are up and running. Alright, let's get over. Alright, I haven't got any battery warnings yet. I know I'm getting low, but I'll definitely get a battery warning. So when I get that battery warning, I'll stop, but for now I'll just keep going. This is popular in here, my goodness. Just trying not to run into people. Everyone's kind of wandering everywhere. This is quite a nice little setup. As I say, very Parisian, without kind of looking out onto the street. Oh, here we go, got some cash here. Look at that. What you do get here in Russia is this big sense of inequality, income inequality. You can tell some people got a lot, some people don't. What's going on here? I don't know if they know each other. You get some interesting interactions randomly on the street. And they're together. There's a little bit of an argument between a couple. It's definitely verbalized here. Which I'd say the upside of that is that you kind of let it out, let out that frustration. Whereas Europeans, we tend to hold it in a little bit more. Take it home and unleash it on Google reviews, as I say. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, the inequality here, you do kind of get that, and you can see that there's some really serious wealth in pockets. Whereas Belarus is more of a still communist, it's still very kind of even, it's kind of very middle class. Everyone's very similar, both in etiquette, behaviour, income. It's still got that bit of the communist dream lurking around, Whereas here it's been unleashed. There's rich, there's poor, there's middle class, there's super rich, there's elite, there's all these kind of levels, So this is the guy with the Superman, said hello. I tried to get him but missed him. So you really notice there's a difference. You got the here, the really conspicuous shows of wealth. This guy was here before talking to different girls. He's having fun. Those conspicuous shows of wealth, you do get them in Belarus too, but in much lower quantities. In much lower quantities. Offering me flowers. That's one thing you definitely get a lot more of in Belarus, are flowers. I make a joke, my dad joked that in Belarus GDP is worth, flowers are worth about 5% of GDP. It wouldn't be far off. It'd be measurable anyway, you know what I mean? Whereas here, not as much. Not as much here. I feel like, women in Belarus are kind of pedestalized a lot more, whereas here it's a bit more of a, well, it's not equal as such, but it's a bit more of a fair fight, you know? If we're going to call it between the genders, a bit more of a fair fight here. Whereas Belarus, definitely women are pedestalized quite a lot. And again, I think, there's many reasons for it, but these places are complex histories. So this is one of the first places we saw when we came back, when we started, sorry. I noticed that the guys probably dress actually better in Minsk than they do in Moscow, which is interesting. I think it gives you a good sense of the gender dynamics in the country. How well do the guys have to present themselves? Can they bring traditional male things to the table, or has their value been reduced to the point where they need to look good? I think Western countries, obviously, guys are competing, and also places like Korea, which are really failing as cultures, just not having any kids at all, and the men are starting to have to dress like K-pop stars. I mean, the ultimate derogatory situation. So I think that how much men have to dress up probably gives you a sense of the power dynamics in a country, you know? And places like kind of Spain and Italy that are deeply matriarchal, they tend to have guys that maybe even put in more effort than girls do. And of course, again, these countries are failing miserably as well. Extremely low fertility rates, just emptying out as countries, as we are in this part of the world as well. You definitely see more, this is only one child obviously, but you definitely see a lot more two-children families here. This girl's live streaming. She's trying to compete with Australia and Belarus. No, she's not, just given up. Alright everybody, what are we at? 28 minutes. I might hit you guys up to go 30. I'm only going to go home now. It's getting on in the evening. It's a beautiful Sunday summer's evening here in Moscow. And you get a lot of mixes here, I have to say. It's there's almost as many ethnic Russians here as not ethnic Russians in Moscow. And my eye's not tuned into this part of the world, so I can't tell if someone's Azerbaijani, if they're Kazakhstan, if they're just from another part of Russia. I haven't got the experience like I might maybe with Europeans or Asians. Well, there you go. Pretty nice wheels. Alright, let's try and walk on the outside here. Yeah, it's a very interesting place, Russia, I have to say. I'm certainly glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm able to see quite significant contrasts with Belarus Of course, again, it depends where you are in Belarus. And look, I've only scratched the surface here. I've only been to the two big cities, and everyone says that Moscow and Peter are a different beast, quote unquote, not the real Russia. But definitely a good place to start, I think, to get a bit of a sense of what's going on. Not sure what was going on there. I have had a situation in a country where I was followed by undercover police and approached and stopped in a fairly unusual position. So I did have a bit of a heart flutter then. It's like, oh fuck, are they going to bug me? Are these guys somebody? They just kind of stopped there on their bikes, but they were just civilians doing their own things. And yeah, that country wasn't here or Belarus, just FYI. But nonetheless was, just ask some questions, nothing too interesting to be fair. The good thing here is that I'm able to report a bit from Belarus and Russia, but I'm not big enough to anyone to give a shit, No one really cares. Oh, you got like a few thousand subscribers, like no one cares. I don't say anything too controversial, so I'm not trying to be controversial, I'm not trying to make it political or some shit like this, so no one really cares, which is good that nobody cares. Just slide under the radar and live life. Just have the fun of making YouTube videos. I had one really interesting thing to say that I wanted to share with you guys, and I just forgot what it was. Oh yeah, in Belarus. In Belarus, it's a real novelty being Australian. Like really, like people's eyes pop out of their heads. Like whereas in Russia, they're not that interested. It's like whatever. You're in Russia, our country's better. And I guess in some ways it is, some ways it isn't. Depends who you are. Depends what it is that you want and what you value. That girl's giving me a big smile. So yeah, the Belarusian, what was I just saying? I totally forgot. So yeah, Belarus. Oh yeah, so being a foreigner in Belarus is like a thing, and I get recognised surprisingly quite a bit, despite my very humble little channel here. And I actually got approached by a journalist from Belarus 1, which is their #1 television station. He invited me on, but then he was an intern, and he said, "Oh, this can do a background check on you." I'm like, that's interesting. I think I'm a foreigner. They've already done a background check on me, actually. Is the reality of this kind of place when you've only got a small number of foreigners. And yeah, the Belarusian government has been receiving fairly aggressive, hostile responses from the West for about 3 or 4 years now, including an unsuccessful coup back in 2020, and then various layers of sanctions leading up to the current situation in Ukraine. So I'm surprised they even let anyone in, to be honest, but they do. And I've never heard of anyone having a problem as a foreigner, unless they invite it. Oh, should I tell this story? Or this is a great story. Oh yeah, I'll tell it, alright. You guys talked me into it. We're at 33 minutes, so only the hardcore guys are still watching, right? So a mate of mine was crossing, he was on a bus crossing from Vilnius, Lithuania, into Minsk, Belarus. And this was, every now and then there's a bit of political flare-up on the border there, and there's a bit of power games, and one side kind of fucks with the other side and whatever, and they were delaying buses and clowning around a bit at one stage recently. And then my mate was on the way in on a bus, and there was a British guy on the bus, right, and he was really pissed. And you're crossing an international border, you got to obviously go through 2 lots of border control and blah blah blah, and at the moment things are tricky, so you got to bring your patient hat, right, be a grown up. This guy was really being shitty. He was yelling abuse, what the fuck's going on, hurry the fuck up, blah blah. And the Belarusian border guards, who, look, I've only had good experiences with them, and I've never heard anything too bad about them, although I do know a guy who recently had a large sum, a 5-figure sum, confiscated because he didn't declare it. But apparently there's a process, and there's a good chance we'll get most of it back. But apart from that, I've never heard any problems or anything. But anyway, this guy's getting really mouthy apparently, and my mate's like, I'm really surprised that this English guy is really just going off his head. And English guys are, well, they can be mixed like Australian guys. They can be passive, they can be a bit aggressive, I guess. But anyway, so there was a Ukrainian guy coming in as well. So just interviewed the Ukrainian guy for 10 minutes, whatever. Make sure he's not a spy or something like this. And then just let him back on the bus. And then the British guy was gone for about an hour. And then my mate saw him in the room there, like changing rooms with one of those like hospital gowns on, where it's like exposed at the back. And he reckons gave him a good searching because he was being so mouthy and abusive. Kind of interesting. Again, you wouldn't expect that for no reason, right? Like, why would they bother themselves with this kind of behaviour? Only if there's a reason, right? But interesting anecdote. So yeah, anyway, the guy invited me onto Belarus 1, but because the guy was just an intern, he actually left before we kind of discussed it properly. But the last I spoke to him, until I just bumped into him by accident the other day, was that whatever it is, the background checkers, Beltalrad, or something to this effect, were going to investigate me and make sure I'm okay to have on television. Of course, it's not going to be something political, or it's just going to be, how do you find Belarus? What do you think about Belarus? What food do you eat? Do you like potatoes? This kind of question, right? Just a bit of fun. But yeah, they didn't get back to me, so I presume I didn't pass the background test. But as I say, unless you're deliberately causing trouble or some drama, they just don't really care, just whatever, which is good. Alright, well, I was going to say ladies and gentlemen, but I have to say, I famously quoted about a month ago that my female audience was almost 10% of my whole audience, if you could imagine. But it's dropped to about 5%. I think of the live streams I've been doing kind of engages the hardcorers. So yeah, I'll just say gentlemen, and maybe the odd lady. If you are a lady watching at 37 minutes, congratulations. I'm glad you've joined us. But for now, I think my battery's getting a bit flat and I'm ready for home. So hope you enjoyed walking around Moscow, around Patriarch Ponds on this beautiful Sunday summer's evening.